Welcome, everybody. I'm Dan Porterfield, the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. I'm here today with Bernard Jazzar, who is an extremely important person in the Aspen Institute for all sorts of reasons, including that he has designed the inaugural exhibition, Herbert Bayer, an introduction, that is in our brand new, just open to the public officially today, Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies. And let me start us right off by thanking Linda and Stuart Resnick, who are here today and who have been our champions as we have sought over the years to present to our many publics the aesthetic heritage that is this institute, led by, of course, the brilliant Herbert Bayer. Linda, Stuart, your leadership, your championing of Bayer, of art, of aesthetics, its relevance for the world we live in today, as well as your founder's gift for the center, is absolutely priceless for our organization, for what we are. Thank you so much for being here. Now, I suspect we have in the room many who have been thinking about the Bauhaus and Herbert Bayer for years. We may have some for whom this is a new topic. We have got an incredible expert with us, and I'm going to turn it to Bernard and interview him a little bit, and then we'll invite you to ask questions. But first, let me say a word about our Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies, with again, the urging that you make your way over to this now highly activated and beautiful part of the campus where you can see this gem of a museum and the extraordinary art that's contained within it and exhibited by Bernard. And about 3 years ago, when I was just starting at the Aspen Institute, Linda came to me and said, "You're going to be getting to know a lot of different things about the Institute. It's a big organization, 90 programs around the world. I hope you enjoy learning about the Bauhaus and about Bayer, because I think you'll find there's something very meaningful there." My wife, Karen, my daughters, Caroline and Lizzie, who are here, then went on a tour that Bernard gave us of the campus, which we should think of as a total work of art. Every single pathway, earthwork, bush, designed for a reason, to create an experience. We'll talk more about that experience with Bernard. But I saw it, it didn't take but a minute, like 5 minutes. It didn't take any time at all to realize, wow, what a goldmine, this aesthetic and design heritage of the Aspen Institute. What an absolute treasure. And I could already start making connections between this aesthetic and design heritage with the actual work of the Aspen Institute in the world, trying to drive change everywhere from Ukraine to South Florida to Mexico and more. You could really feel this connection. And a brand is a very, very important thing, as Linda knows better than any of us. And there's an opportunity for us to activate our brand by going deep and understanding still better what were the ideas and the values that led to our formation. And how were those ideas both carried here by our founders, Elizabeth and Walter Paepcke, but also how was, excuse me for one moment. Thank you. It's good to have a sight line from the crowd because I wasn't so sure there wasn't somebody who was hurt. So I'll continue on then. What we understand when we understand our brand is we understand the values and the vision that started this place. And it's our responsibility as leaders for it to carry that brand forward, to develop it for the world we live in today, but to also ensure that the world we live in today can benefit from what is most authentic about the Aspen Institute. And Bayer's work deeply connects to what we're doing today around the world in so many areas. So with Linda's support, we then began to dream. And the dream was, could we create a beautifully appointed museum that would allow us to exhibit the art we own, to borrow, and some of our lenders are here today, borrow some of Bayer's work from around the country and around the world, from both museums and from private collectors. Could we begin to put on exhibitions that would introduce our many publics to the work of Herbert Bayer? And could we have a place to protect our art, which wasn't being protected, as Linda reminded us a number of times? We have this great aesthetic tradition, but we have to honor the past by preserving the past. And so we created this facility with many supporters, but led by Linda and Stuart, that gives us the ability to do that. And some have asked me, well, so, again, why? What is it you were trying to accomplish here? What are you hoping for with the inauguration of this wonderful center? And to me, it comes down to sort of a couple sort of core principles and goals that we'll pursue. One is to preserve and protect our legacy. We only have one. This is it. It's our obligation to protect it and ensure that it's relevant and thriving in the future. A second is that the Bayer Center allows us to activate a part of the campus that really had been a bit sleepy over the years. And now we've renovated the Betcher building as well, which is the building adjacent to the center, the last one that Herbert designed. We've also created a beautiful grounds and a wonderful entranceway into the campus. And we will be able to welcome now many more people into the Aspen Institute with a sense of arrival that I think is so important to an identity of an organization. Third thing that we're going to be doing with this center is deepening our connections with the community of Aspen and the surrounding communities in which we exist in a reciprocal relationship. And we at the Aspen Institute are doing a lot of work in the Roaring Fork Valley to address compelling human needs. And this museum and gallery gives us the ability to welcome all from the greater Aspen community to the campus to learn about the history of this incredible part of the world, to be inspired by the work of Herbert Bayer, and to think with that creativity that Bayer so exemplifies about how can we frame and solve and understand the problems of today. And so one thing I hope you'll see in our work over the next few years is even more intentionality and purpose in connecting our many communities to this center and to the Institute as a whole, and even more pride of place around this region, that the Aspen Institute is here as an anchor institution committed to decades and even centuries of thriving community. And then the last thing I'd like to say is that when you have access to your aesthetic heritage and understand yourselves in another way, a deeper way, and access to that can influence the work we do in all sorts of arenas in the Institute. So that too, the Bayer Center isn't just a part of the Institute, it's actually connected to everything else we are doing, so much of which you know about and have supported that's making a real difference in people's lives. So with that sort of opening to this, I'm now so excited to introduce you to Bernard Jazzar, who has made 4 exhibitions on Bayer in the Institute over the past few years, as well as a 5th one on the 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus, which is right downstairs. And so I'd like to give an assignment to everybody. Next time you're in this building, if not today, go downstairs and you will see the incredible insights and presentation skills that Bernard shared with us in putting that one together. So let me ask you, Bernard, who's, by the way, an expert in 18th century French art. So this is something you picked up along the way. Who is Herbert Bayer, and why do you think he matters to the Aspen Institute?
Thank you, Dan. What a great opening remarks you gave, and capturing why we're doing this today. And so I was lucky in 1982 as a design student to come to Aspen to the International Design Conference and attend a wonderful presentation called "The Future Isn't What It Used to Be." And that's when I first heard about Herbert Bayer. And in design school, he came up. And so it made me want to know more about Herbert Bayer. But it wasn't until December 2005 when Linda calls me and says, I just found this most beautiful artwork. I'm in love with it. It's by someone named Herbert Bayer. It's like, oh. So that began our journey to learn more about Herbert Bayer, do presentations about him. So in a summary, Herbert's mother had the good fortune of giving birth to him in 1900. So we always know his age when you see the year pop up. So, born in 1900 in Austria. 2 things, he wanted to be an artist from a young age, and his mother encouraged him. But he didn't attend art school. He had hoped to go to the Vienna Academy, but his father died in 1917, and then he's enlisted in the army. So he leaves the army at the end of the war and travels around, and then has the fortune to do a couple of internships with architects. Second one being in Darmstadt, where there was an artist colony. And two things he comes upon that will affect the rest of his life. First, it was Vasily Kandinsky's seminal book on the spiritual on art, written in 1912. Still in use today in schools, in art schools, where it's a required reading because it's about an artist and how the artist perceived. And it's not about just mimicking nature, but finding the spiritual aspect of it and trying to capture that through personal interpretation. And so that's one side of Herbert, this very spiritual-based person who's looking for meaning in what he sees, especially in nature. The other document he comes across is the 1919 manifesto by Walter Gropius about the institution of a new school in Weimar, Germany, the Bauhaus, which you see the manifesto there. And he reads that, and he decides right there and then he wants to go there. Why? Because Vasily Kandinsky is supposed to be teaching there. So two things come together for him, and those two will guide him through the rest of his life. And they're very, very crucial to understanding Herbert Bayer and what motivates him for the rest of his life. So he claims, at the Bauhaus, he had the misfortune of not being able to learn how to paint because they didn't teach painting. They taught so many things, but they didn't teach painting and sculpture. So he throws himself into every aspect. He does the Kandinsky mural painting workshop, but he gets into typography and creates the most amazing, the most cutting edge at that time, photography, letterhead, all sorts of things. And so he develops a different persona in the Bauhaus as opposed to what he thought he was going to be when he was growing up. And from 28, he leaves the Bauhaus, he settles in Berlin, becomes the premier designer of typography advertising. His connection to the Bauhaus leads him to a lot of connection in the business world in Berlin, his exposure to the various art. Berlin was thriving at that point, and all the galleries were showing amazing artwork, so he absorbs all that. And what you're seeing here is kind of a montage I put together of everything he kind of got himself into: exhibition design, painting, sculpture, photography, photo montage, advertisement, magazine covers, typography. He really, that 10 years he spent in Berlin, he blossomed. And he became a consummate businessman, which will come in handy when he moves to New York in 1938, part of because the National Socialist government was just constricting what could be expressed. And his wife and daughter were Jewish, and it just was not sustainable for him in Berlin. So in New York, he spends 8 years there, and being brought initially to teach at the new Bauhaus in Chicago, but by that time it was defunct. Moholy-Nagy was not able to sustain the school beyond the 9 months it existed. So he didn't have a teaching position. He had become a German citizen because Austria was annexed, and he was no longer Austrian but German, so he's considered an enemy of the state, being German. But he makes the best of it. And again, you see a conglomeration of images here of the types of things. Again, exhibition design. He does 3 amazing exhibitions for MoMA. The one you're seeing in the upper corner is Airways to Peace. He does advertisement. He works for the government to support the war efforts, the Allies' war efforts. He paints. He does magazine covers. So again, he's this multidisciplined artist. And eventually he gets over his depression of the initial move and becomes quite settled. And he has the luck in 1945, I say luck because he also considered it, to meet Elizabeth and Walter Paepcke. He designs an exhibition called Modern Art in Advertising, and sponsored by the Container Corporation of America. And it opens at the Art Institute in Chicago, and there he meets both Elizabeth and Walter, who with great urging invite him and Joella to move to Aspen, which they do in 1946. And that begins the greatest period of Herbert's life and achievement. Starting first creating the most amazing advertisement to bring people to Aspen for leisure, winter activity, summer activity. Posters, brochures, bins, all sorts of things that he creates to revive this town, Walter Paepcke's dream of seeing Aspen first become a leisure center, and then in 1949 with the Goethe Bicentennial to become a cultural center for not just everyone, but especially for businessmen, to be educated into how do you work with artists, how do you work holistically for the betterment of your society, not just focusing on the bottom line of how much money you make, but incorporating these other things, including design and art. And Herbert Bayer impassioned speech that he gives about Goethe and the importance of humanity and thought and culture is an important part of this 1949 convocation. So Walter Paepcke decides to found the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, and Herbert is immediately put to work, as you can see here, creating brochures, logos, all sorts of things. And bit by bit, this center becomes very important, and so buildings are needed. And in 1953, the first seminar building, which is now known as the Koch building, is erected. With a budget of $35,000, Herbert had to put this structure together. And what does he also do? He creates his first mural, which you see on the wall of the building, the Sgraffito mural, which is still up to date that you can see. So since you're bringing in these businessmen now, you need to lodge them. So he starts creating the chalets and the lodges where they have to be. And he starts thinking, you create the east side is going to be for the business. Now the west side of campus is going to be where they rest, where they entertain. So he also creates the first earthworks around these chalets and lodges, the first in the country, which are still around. Sadly, as Aspen Ideas attendees, you get to not see these and enjoy them at their fullest because they're usually covered up. And so part of again, this philosophy is you not only work with the brain, but you work with the body, so the health center gets created, and this whole, again, the holistic approach to the individual becomes very important. Walter Paepcke sadly dies in '61, so Herbert loses his patron, his friend, and he designs this memorial building and beautifully incorporates it with the seminar building that you're seeing here in plan view. And so this view from the 1960s shows you the seminar building with Paepcke building together, this vast space between them, and then the lodges and the health center. So Robert Anderson becomes the president of the Aspen Institute. He becomes Herbert Bayer's patron and great friend. So he's asked to then create something that links these two areas of the campus. And again, Herbert rises to the occasion in the most phenomenal way and creates Anderson Park, which is one of the most stupendous part of this campus. Again, sadly, you don't get to see it as you walk across campus now, but when you can come back and see this stunning place, many people think it existed this way. But to now keep in mind that this was purposefully created to look this way rather than it was made this way. You saw the picture from 1960 and you saw how vacant that place is. Herbert envisioned this space in a most amazing, wonderful way. And then his last building on campus was the Betcher building, which is a very, very beautiful and underrated building. I love that building from the moment I saw it. And there it stood on the southeast corner of campus, hidden by bushes, unseen, nice lawn next to it. Thankfully, with the Resnick gift and with Jeff Perkis's design, we have now the most stupendous building on campus, in my opinion, the Resnick Center for Herbert Bayer Studies.
And you played more than a little role in helping us get it right and really making sure that we could protect art, display it beautifully, and represent the Bauhaus aesthetic in the building itself. It works at every level, and thank you so much for that. So let me ask you the question that I kind of was opened with a little bit from your perspective. Why devote a center to Bayer?
Well, I mean, you saw what he did on this campus, and as has been said, especially by Linda, to you right from the beginning, you own a masterpiece, the whole campus, 40 acres of it. I mean, how can you forget the man? Walter Paepcke is memorialized by a building. Herbert Bayer is unknown for the most part. Linda was great. Why doesn't someone mention his name? He is part of the origin story of this campus. He planned it. He was so instrumental. The way he placed the buildings and to take in mountain views, to allow air circulation, to have people move, how they were I mean, how could you ignore someone who put so much thought and effort into creating this place?
Yeah. Well, speaking of thought and effort, you have put in so much thought and effort in every aspect of our being able to connect to our heritage, but in particular in designing Herbert Bayer an Introduction, our inaugural exhibition in the Bayer Center. It's incredible. It's incredible. And I've walked through 5, 6, 7 times now, sometimes alone, just trying to take it in the sense of extraordinary organizing and curatorial intelligence that allows this massive body of work to be presented coherently. So could I ask you to share with the audience how you've thought about designing that exhibition, what's in it, and what would you point them towards to go and enjoy when they have a chance to visit if they haven't been in yet?
Well, thank you for your kind words about the exhibition.
That's an objective fact. Those weren't kind words.
In case you should know, I have a photo of Herbert Bayer in my office, who looks at me every day, and I look back at him. So he's constantly, I have Linda, who's always in my mind, in my head, who's my greatest mentor, and I have Herbert Bayer looking at me at the same time. So I'm so lucky.
How do you sleep at night?
Ask Linda. I don't sleep. So knowing how much thought and what a perfectionist he was, as is Linda, by the way, that how do you approach something and how do you pay respect to someone who put so much effort into everything he created? You don't dismiss it. And how do you tell that story? He was such a polymath. And so I needed to show the range of his work, show from when he was a teenager to the last series of work, the anthology, where he's reflecting on his life and creating artwork. So I decided it needed to be a retrospective of sorts. And being we're in a small building, unlike the Lentos Museum, which had the most phenomenal retrospective in 2009 with multiple galleries, we were tiny. And we didn't have a big budget, so it was begging lenders and working with people, please let go of your precious pieces so we could put together a show that could tell a beautiful story. And so when you walk in downstairs, it starts downstairs, and you're introduced to Herbert Bayer. And because Herbert is known primarily as a designer, and when people talk about him, they talk about him as a designer, and he, in all of his writing, he goes, I am first and foremost a painter. I'm an artist. This is a man who drew and painted every single day, even when, like I said, his right hand was crushed in an accident. He learned to use his left hand, so he could continue to do that with the assistant of Paul Hobson, his studio assistant. So I wanted to introduce Herbert as an artist, but also bring in his other works in design, in tapestries, in sculpture, everything he did. So you walk in and you see this conglomeration of works divided by decade as much as possible, so you can follow a story of sorts, starting in the teens and here in his Berlin years. And as you see, both paintings and typography and advertisement work together, to his move to New York with the war paintings on one side, and then after the war, things that he started exploring, to his coming to Aspen and the freedom he felt and the love he felt for this place and the beautiful images he created, to then exploring other issues that had to do with structures and geometries and the Fibonacci sequence and how those played into his work. Initially, when they're seen, they're quickly dismissed as, these are not significant, but the more time I spent with Herbert and his writing and his work, the greater appreciation I got for these. It took a while for me to get there, but I eventually got there.
I have to interrupt for 1 second because we were in a big zoning process. We were very successful and very supported, but of course the groups were asking, well, what is that? Why this? And someone was asking us about the sidewalk and the shape of the walkway. This was in one hearing when Bernard wasn't there, and we gave a fine answer. Bernard comes the next one, and they start talking about the sidewalk, and he says, well, the Fibonacci sequence. And it was amazing. It was amazing. The design of the walkway, the patio in the front, your ability to connect it to Bayer's thinking and then to share with our zoning group, which wanted to help us. Oh, I see the logic of this. It's Herbert's logic. It was incredible. Okay.
Well, it was what Jeff was also inspired, Jeff Berkus, and it was so much fun designing this building, Jeff, because we were taking Herbert's ideas and saying how could we manifest them without copying Herbert, but honoring Herbert. And it was such an honor to be able to do that. And these are visions of, views of the last works he created. But to me, one of the most significant galleries in this display is the biography room, which I love so much. I had such a great time trying to tell his stories, which I do with boards and with photographs and with artifacts borrowed from the Aspen Historical Society. It was so great to put all this together, to be able to tell Herbert's story and how important he was to Aspen and the Institute.
So this is a little bit of a setup question because you and I believe this pretty passionately. Why do you think Herbert is still relevant, his work is still relevant today?
Well, you touched on something, and again, I'm going to ask you to elaborate. Why did you get so excited about having this center on the campus?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but one, you had put together the exhibition about mountains and how Herbert depicted mountains in painting across his career. And so when Bernard showed me that, I realized that Herbert saw that the mountains move. And the motion of the mountains was depicted. So that was like a lightning bolt. Wow, that's about how we see. It's about how we see time. That's what our work is about, how we see change over time, how we facilitate it, how we react to it. Then you taught me a little bit about the form and function part of Bayer, the integration of what we do with what we see and hold and have. The campus is the ultimate expression of that. But that also is so important to design today, clearly. Think about how Apple has helped us to have the form and function of this male jewelry that we call the iPod or something, or the iPhone. And then there's the other part that really struck me, really deeply, deeply struck me. And I can't describe it perfectly, but I sensed the humility before nature in the design of the campus, so critical for us today, combined with, I want to call it a collaborative spirit in the design of the buildings and in moving the seminar experience from a head of the table with an expert to a rounded experience where everyone is on an equal plane. And so in all those ways, it felt like with the help of you and then with Linda, we could use those concepts to advance our work in the world. It's about bringing people together in dialogue so that they together can create something neither could have made alone for the betterment of society. And all that swept up in me. And that's part of what I'm excited to do in my role to represent the Institute, is to connect the Institute's work to this aesthetic tradition. Okay, but I'm kind of afraid, having said that, because I'm in front of a master. So was that a B+?
Yes. I think I would even give you an A. But I love that you said the collaboration, because and Herbert really got to experience that. Growing as a child, he didn't have that opportunity, but being in the Bauhaus, it really changed his worldview. And I'll go back to showing you this manifesto that Gropius wrote. And it's only 4 pages, with the front being the illustration. But in his, I don't know how much you can see of this, but he says the goal of our lives is to create the ultimate building, and all crafts have to come together. And I am to banish the hierarchies of crafts, of arts and crafts. We are all together to create one ultimate thing. And the basic word, the Germans love combining words to create a new word. The Gesamtkunstwerk, the total work of art, is what the ideal that drove the Bauhaus. And Bayer got so immersed into that. And so an example of what happened in 1923 for Gropius to get funding from the Weimar government to keep the school running, they said you have to put together an exhibition of what your school has achieved. And in a few months, they made they put a display of what the student worked, but they said, we want to step forward a bit. They got the students and the faculty to competition to design a house that they could put up in less than 6 months. And one of the students, interestingly, won the competition and came up with this amazing floor plan that had the living room in the middle, surrounded by the kitchen, the dining room, the nursery, the wife's bedroom, the husband's bedroom, the office. Very, very simple. And they built this amazing sculpture. And every single individual at the Institute, at the Bauhaus, contributed to this. Gropius designed the handles for the doors. Moholy-Nagy did work. Marcel Breuer did the chairs. Günther Stössels did the tapestry. Sadly, this house did not survive too well. It was bombed, but it's been reconstructed and now is an art center. And they've put back Breuer's furniture, Gunther Stürzel's carpets, and several other things that had been created in 1923. So although Herbert personally did not get involved in the design of the house, he was involved in promoting the whole exhibition. First, he created 3 mural paintings that you see on the left side that based on Kandinsky's idea of the circle, square, and triangle being the primary shapes, and red, yellow, and blue being the primary colors. So each landing of the 3-story building had a mural executed by Herbert Bayer. He also designed the poster in the middle for the whole exhibition that was put all around Weimar. And then, most significantly, was the cover of the 1923 exhibition catalog, which today is still held as a premier example of typography and design. These letters had to be hand-drawn because no fonts existed that they could use to create those. So that he was part of this collaborative effort. So jump forward 30 years later, and Herbert again is put in a situation. Walter Paepcke comes to him and says, okay, the world has changed since World War II. All our maps are kind of no longer, valid. We need a new atlas. And he challenged Herbert to create an atlas. And Herbert rose to the occasion. For 5 years, from 1948 to 53, Herbert gathered the most amazing thinkers, astronomers, physicists, learned as much. He couldn't find anything he could just go. So he went to various sources and picked from every single one, and then assembled an amazing team, both in Aspen, as you can see in these photographs, including Joella, who's standing next to him, who was a very important contributor, the various designers who worked with him, and let's not forget Fluffy the cat, who's sitting on the table, I'm sure assisting in many ways to creating this phenomenal atlas that I still can't believe that it was put together. So in 1953, it's published. Walter Paepcke decides it's not for sale, it's primarily gifts for corporate clients, and then to go into libraries. And so it's called the World Geographic, and graphic is very interesting here, Atlas, a composite of man's history. And so he puts his foreword is huge, thanking everyone who contributed to it. And the list is phenomenal when you look at it. But in the table of contents, beside listing all of the maps of the countries and the United States, I want to draw attention. Look at the first thing. Cosmogony is the first part of the atlas. Astronomy is the second part. Look at where he's starting. He's starting with the Big Bang Theory in 1953, creating the whole universe. Which atlas have you seen begins with how the universe got created? And then the solar system is next. Look at this graphic layout. It's just breathtaking, showing the size of the sun in comparison to the planets. Pluto was still a planet back then. And then geology. He talks about the Earth formation. Look at on the side that chart with the spiral, and then tracing the history of what creatures existed and how long they existed for. That's the most beautiful graphic representation of existence in the world. The atmosphere. I mean, the way the clouds are illustrated, how high the planes could travel at that time, how the movement of the Earth affects the environment, the air we breathe, how all these clouds are formed. I mean, then economy, thinking here in the United States, he consulted so much. Again, this is 1953, so it's dated, but how many things are produced? Where is the manufacture? Where are the centers? So he's thinking geographically as the whole world. And he did this for every single country, not just the United States. And I'm just showing you Florida here, for instance. He's talking about how much agriculture is produced, how much tourist is coming in, all these things that he's thinking about in 1953. To bring it all together in one book is just mind-boggling, and the amount of collaboration that took. And he's humble enough to say, this was a group effort, but he had to learn it all himself, so he could then communicate it. And he continued collaborating throughout his life. Here he is with Paul Hobson in his 80s when he was getting frail. And again, Paul talked about not only was he there constantly with him, but all the various architects and designers who helped him achieve amazing things for ARCO, because ARCO was his main client, throughout the country from Alaska to Pennsylvania and everything in between. Everything they executed was to a supreme level. I mean, even though Herbert could not physically be there, these people were so in tune with his philosophy that they could all collaborate and produce amazing things. And in a way, it's a reflection of what he thought of the Institute, which was his most beloved place, and how he thought people could come together to create the ultimate.
Well, and there's a copy of the atlas in the Bayer Gallery, if you get a chance to go through. And with Bernard's inspiration and brilliance, we're looking ahead to perhaps having someday an exhibition entirely dedicated to the atlas. Well worth it, I think, as a topic relevant today.
Yes, there's a great scholar in Tulane University, Walter Isaacson, in fact, introduced him to me and to Lissa, New Orleans.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ben Bennis, who is writing a book, and I think it's being published recently, and we're hoping to work with him. He traces the history of the creation of this atlas and the atlases that existed prior to Herbert's atlas. So hopefully we can do this presentation in the new Bayer Center.
Well, I'm sure we can. Well, thank you, Bernard. Let's open it up for questions. We have two mic runners, and we have a question on the far left.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your comments. I'm Benji Villiers. I'm the senior advisor for high school through college programming at Cooper and College Scholars. And one thing that I saw as a theme throughout your comments was this focus on space, the individual within a space, individual and object in the space, and how they move and represent within that space. In your work with Bayer's work, how much do you see in his work reflect the shifting in communities within space? Because even in his 30 years in Aspen, Aspen looks very different 30 years ago to how it looks now. And also in your curating of the gallery, how much did you envision the individuals in the space, not even just the bodies, but where those individuals are coming from and how they move about that space, just so for us to think about as we go downstairs and explore it.
May I?
Yeah.
You know, when Herbert was building these buildings on campus, again, budget was very, very small. He had to, and the technology that was available back then is not today. So the Institute, thankfully, has been addressing his buildings. I mean, he oriented, for instance, in the seminar building, the first building I showed you, he knew that the focus was to remain inside, but he wanted light to come in. So he only did clear story windows so that the air, although you could not, I mean, they were operable, you could allow light and air to come into the rooms. There was no air conditioning, so they didn't have the budget for that. So today, the Institute has preserved that, but has upgraded the building, and again, it needs another upgrade. But the best illustration of that is the Betcher building that was renovated as the Bayer Center was being built. The respect that was paid to that building, honoring Herbert's idea of how one circulates in that building, and the scale of the rooms, again, they're all hexagonals because Herbert strongly believed that you encourage dialogue when you're all at the same level as opposed to the head. So those were all preserved with Herbert's wishes to continually encourage that dialogue. And so when Jeff was designing the Bayer Center, we talked about human scale and taking into consideration Herbert Bayer's artwork and the scale of it. So all the spaces you see in there, I love that they are so intimate. You don't feel eaten up. And then the artwork don't feel they're taking over the space. So even though this exhibition has nearly 200 pieces, the comments I keep hearing back from people is, you really don't feel it. You're not overwhelmed. So we felt we were honoring Herbert in that sense, in that we're continually thinking of how an individual, whether in a wheelchair, whether standing, whatever it is, walks through this space, experiences this space, how the lighting is done, how, temperature control, humidity control, which is necessary for preserving art anyway, but it helps preserve human being too. So all of that has been taken in consideration, and we're grateful to the Aspen Institute that honors, and the Betcher building is now a historical monument that has been put, because it's been so well taken care of and preserved so for future generations. So we hope we're continually honoring Herbert Bayer's work and keeping, first and foremost, human beings into the consideration of how everything's treated.
And one other compliment to what Bernard said, Benji, is that one of our donors and supporters, Carrie Walton Penner and her husband, gave us a very significant endowment gift, which allows us to create an educational director role that will be connecting to all the Aspen schools throughout the valley, including where there's an enormous Latino population, new residents in the community. We'll be able to bring that community into the center in all kinds of ways and bring the center's programming out to the community. That gift also allows us to bring on board each summer, starting next summer, 2 interns from HBCUs. And I really believe this aesthetic tradition is going to connect in all kinds of wildly exciting ways to things like the tradition of W.B. Du Bois in doing data visualization. And so much more remains to be connected, I think, because of this tradition. We have a question here, and here comes the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation. How was Herbert Bayer involved with the Aspen seminar and Mortimer Adler's work on classics and so on?
Again, because of his close involvement with Walter Paepcke, Mortimer Adler, all of these people, he was constantly in dialogue with them. And like I said, I hope you can find that speech he gave about Goethe. And he was Herbert Bayer operated on so many levels. He was an avid skier. He was you could say Renaissance man in a way. But he was so interested in ideas, in philosophies, in how all of interconnectedness of all these things, and really instrumental with Walter. And kind of Herbert became Walter's right-hand man in many of these things to help implement and bring into physical fruition how these things could happen. And so closely connected. And he was, as far as I know, Merrill Ford, who was my great, advisor and mentor early on, would talk to me about the meetings they would have with Mortimer Adler, and all these people were very involved at the beginning with Herbert Bayer, and what a great group of people that was.
Let me look to this side of the room to see a question right here.
Thank you very much for a great presentation, and thank you for sharing really 2 more jewels in the Aspen Institute crown. And thank you to the Resnicks for all you've done. I would love to know how you all got so excited about the Bayers, because when I went through the collection yesterday, I was so impressed with all the pieces that you own. Thank you.
Linda, would you like to address that? The mic is coming if you have a word.
As Bernard said, back in 2005, I went into a little gallery here in Aspen, and I found what even today is my favorite picture. It's the one in the, is it still in the media room, or no, it's in the
It's in the exhibition, yes.
Yeah. So it's a small little picture, but I went crazy when I saw it. And I was so embarrassed, because when I called Bernard and I said, have you ever heard of Herbert Bayer? He said, and I was in Aspen, he said, you're sitting in him. He's all around you. How could you not know who Herbert Bayer is? He was a little kinder because he's so sweet, but that was his message. And it took, it's been a 17-year journey of us collecting. We own 150 Bayer pieces. We used to buy them very inexpensively. The market's gone up tremendously. We created our own market here for Herbert Bayer. But I just love his sensibility and everything about him, and the fact that he includes all disciplines in his work. Where do you find that? So that's kind of how it happened. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Linda. I think we have time for another question. Yes, all the way in the back.
Thank you. David Hernandez from Allstate. We were honored to tour the center this morning. It was really fantastic. I've long been a fan of Bayer, but I've never seen his work together in that sort of context. And I was struck by the fact that he was such an amazing sponge of the design and the cultural world around him. He was kind of a magic mirror. As you walk from room to room, you could see Albers or Malevich or Calder or Picasso or Dali showing up in his work in ways that I never realized before. Did he, in his writings or just anecdotally, speak to those influences?
He always insisted that because he's always been grouped, for instance, in the early works in the 30s as part of the Surrealist movement. You see those photo montages of him coming apart, or the hands with the eyes. And he insisted, he wasn't a Surrealist. I think he was much more of a pragmatist, and he was exploring. But he was great friends with Calder, with Mondrian. He was surrounded with all these cultures. But what I love is that you don't see it looking like a Calder. You don't see it looking like a Mondrian. Yeah. As you said, he sponged it, and it's amazing. I mean, I think the greatest creators have been the ones who have been able to take various influences and then give it to you back in a different way, without having to fanfare and do all that about themselves. Look how great I am, and I love that about him. That, I mean, later in life, he regretted that he wasn't better known as a painter and tried very hard. The Guggenheim was planning a retrospective for him, but it never happened. And he was a bit bitter about it at the end, because he really wished he could have been better recognized as an artist so people could see what he had created in his life. But he was a sponge in that sense, and he found every opportunity to learn and grow, and that's why I find him inspirational.
You couldn't have made a better comment for me to maybe close this. It's hard to imagine someone so accomplished possibly being bitter, given all that he contributed to our world. But of course, that happens with artists so much. And who knows? Maybe Herbert Bayer is aware of what Linda and Stuart have done, and maybe he's aware of what you've done. And maybe we can tell him today, rest easy, Herbert. We got this. We got this.
Yes.
The work will be protected, it will be amplified, and it will be loved. Thank you so much, Bernard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.